Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Josh Claypo from the South Central Center for Public Health Preparedness. Today is August 29th, and for a year we've been trying to make sense of what happened during Hurricane Katrina. There have been lots of different lessons learned, but there always seems to be a common denominator: the people. Whether that's having enough people, people being able to communicate with one another, or people being able to carry out their responsibilities. It comes down to people interacting with each other and the environment. But what happens when that environment's too overwhelming? Think about this for a minute. A medical needs shelter that has to accommodate 30 to 40,000 individuals, or individuals in administrative roles suddenly needing to provide direct care to victims, or people who've lost everything they have needing to come to work. How do you get people ready for such an overwhelming possibility? Well, today we're going to find out. Joining us today are Kathy Vincent, who's the staff assistant to the State Health Officer for the Alabama Department of Public Health, and Nancy Fleming, who's the Human Resource Director for the Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals. Kathy and Nancy faced exactly that kind of overwhelming environment, and today they're going to share their insights and their stories with us. But before we get started, I want to invite you to participate directly in the discussion we're about to have. We're changing things up a little bit. We're not going to hold the questions off to the end. You are going to help us drive our discussion. So call or email questions to the number and the address that you see on the screen at any time during the broadcast, and when we receive your calls or your emails, we're going to answer them directly. All right, today's broadcast is produced by the South Central Center for Public Health Preparedness in collaboration with the Alabama Department of Public Health. The South Central Center is a partnership of the state and local health departments of Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, several local health departments from these states, and the Schools of Public Health at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAMS, and Tulane University. Funding for the center comes from the CDC. Now, if you'd like more information about the center, you can visit them on the webpage that you see on the screen up here. And if you haven't registered for the program yet, you can still go to the ADPH website and receive handouts and evaluation forms. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, Nancy, Kathy. We have a lot to cover, but I always like to start these broadcasts by asking our faculty, what's the take-home message right in the beginning that you want people to get from the broadcast? And either one can start. Kathy, go ahead.
I think the main thing that I'd like for folks to learn is to talk with us about some of the challenges that we faced, and then some of the ways we looked at addressing them, and some of the mistakes we made, and then some of the things that we still got yet to learn from.
And I agree with that, and also I would like for people to think about what they would do if their best laid plans were overwhelmed by a catastrophe.
Well, sounds like a great place to start. I guess we start maybe before the hurricane. You know, we'll sort of take this chronologically. Obviously, we know the devastation, and you all experience it. What were some of the logistical preparations that you all had in place in advance of landfall? And I think I'll throw this one at Nancy.
Okay. For many years, our department, the Department of Health and Hospitals, was charged with staffing and setting up medical needs shelters all over the state. And we had responded in many events when we had evacuations. And so we have emergency policies in place. We have our employees. We thought we had training for enough staff. We ended up needing a lot more staff. We had been through the drills, and we really felt like we were prepared. And when we orient all staff to working in DHH, they are shown a film about our role in disaster preparedness and familiarized with the fact that they could be called out in an emergency. I think most people never dreamed it would actually happen to them. Our medical staff was always very involved and trained, but it went beyond that. So we thought, a plan in place that would work. It had worked many times before.
So it's in the job description, essentially.
Yes.
I guess, one of my questions is, before this, there's a lot of information in orienting somebody to their job. How much is that piece emphasized? I mean, not that it's not covered, but is it emphasized? Is it separated, or is it just sort of goes along as part of the description?
It was always very emphasized for medical staff that would have to respond because there were medical needs shelters, and our traditional thing was the storm's coming and we open the shelters and the medical staff responds, and we did have some support staff from the Office of Public Health that provided non-medical support. But it was sort of not the norm for every employee to receive the type of training that group received. So, you know, as far as it went in our plan and what we were prepared for and what we thought our role was, we felt like we were ready. I believe that now we're doing a lot more training, much more extensive with a lot more people than we did then.
And I was going to say, Kathy, is this similar, I mean, here in Alabama?
It pretty much is. With us, though, having had a Hurricane Ivan back in 2004, which really hit the Alabama Gulf Coast a lot harder than Katrina did. Katrina really impacted Biola Battery and that kind of corner of the state, like the Mississippi Gulf Coast and all. But we really took such a hard hit during Ivan. And I think it was that summer that we really realized that we weren't as prepared. We were kind of in the same situation that Nancy just described. And I think we really understood then after Ivan that we needed to make it clear to every employee, not just the nurses or social workers that might go staff the shelter or the environmentalists that might go help reopen restaurants, but we needed to make it clear to all 4,000 or so of our employees that you might be called on to do something and it is your responsibility just like it is to do whatever your normal day job is. So we undertook in the last, I guess, say year and a half to put an actual statement in every single job description in the department and to go over that with new employees and what that might mean, because we really, like I say, after Ivan, we're kind of in the same boat, and we wanted to make it clear to everyone, a clerk in a county health department, you may not be sent down to staff a shelter, but you're going to be called on to do something different if we have a major event. And I think that has really helped us a lot. And I guess to go kind of back to your first question about the logistics ahead of time, of course we've learned a lot from Katrina that we'll talk about a little bit later, but even after Ivan we realized that we had a long way to go in terms of setting up the logistics support for our staff that might need to be deployed, pre-identifying where shelter sites might be, actually going there, having kits made up that our staff can take and they know ahead of time what's in the kit that they take with them. Some of those kind of details, having a fleet of vehicles that we can transport folks in so they're not dependent on trying to get there. So we really made a big effort in Dennis and Katrina to have some of those steps in place, and of course we've done a whole lot more since then to identify some of those real specific, very concrete logistical kind of information and pre-staging areas that help staff feel a lot more comfortable when they know they're going to have to be responding.
And from top to bottom, I mean, what she said, the comment you made is now every single fourth of the 4,000 employees, there's a statement in there that says you may be called. And so prior to Dennis and Ivan, there may have been in 2,000 employees, but now it's everyone who comes in has got that in there, and that's a part of their training?
That's correct. I think primarily before it was the ones that we traditionally sent to help in mass care shelters. And during Ivan, I guess, and after that, it became apparent that we were going to be doing medical needs shelters in a whole different way than what we had thought about before. And it became apparent that we needed everybody in the agency had to be prepared to respond. And so I think that in and of itself, it sends a message, that that's part of your job. And frankly, I think I had our nursing director, who's in the audience here today, tell me that he thought that it might be a recruiting tool for some folks, because knowing after Katrina so many people wanted to help, if you come work for public health, you very likely will have a chance to help, and that can be appealing for some folks.
Well, now we saw Ivan and Dennis before Katrina, so where were you all relative to where Alabama was with regard to the job description and this sort of make it a part of everybody's job?
Actually, it started for us with Hurricane George in '98 because it was on a path headed toward New Orleans, and it was evident at that point that just the evacuation and the prospect of having a major hurricane in New Orleans, we had to do some different things. And so as far back as '98, we actually had all our policy, all employees that they could be called up in a disaster. But our experience was that didn't happen in previous storms. We had Lily, which was a direct hit in the southwestern part of the state. And even that storm, which probably taxed us the most of any storm that we had before Katrina, that, you know, since I've been working with this department, we sailed through that one with our normal plan. So although we did have the information out to all the employees, yes, we call them reserves. We have our active staff and our reserve staff as far as disasters. And our medical staff on active duty, those are the people that were pre-scheduled. They knew if there was an evacuation, where they were going, what shift they were on, what they would be doing. But the other employees were just kind of back there as reserve employees, and the message was you could be called out, but they had never been called out before through previous storms. And you mentioned Ivan, and that was an interesting situation because there was a major evacuation of New Orleans for Ivan. It was, up to that point, it was the biggest evacuation we had had. And it was kind of good in a way because it was like a dress rehearsal for Katrina.
Right.
Because after the evacuation from Ivan and all the problems that were encountered, like 8-hour car trips from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, which normally takes an hour, the governor ordered a different evacuation plan, and it worked like a breeze. It was great. I mean, the evacuation for Katrina, everybody was real surprised at how well it went and how quick. And it was lucky because over 1 million people got out ahead of the storm, you know, thank goodness. So it was the, you know, feeling with us that we knew, everyone knew that at some point they could be called. It was just the shock of it actually happening.
I think we've got our first email, believe it or not.
Well,
That's
actually, it's a
quick.
phone call
phone
from
call.
Arkansas, Josh.
Okay, Arkansas, go ahead. Who's your call for?
Oh, gee, either one of the panel members.
Okay, great.
What are the best practices could you recommend for determining the staffing mix needed for emergencies and then the training that might require?
Did you get the best practices?
I did.
Okay.
I think, and I'll take a stab, and then
Yeah,
I'm sure you can. You know, I'll mention one situation in particular, and that has to do with medical needs shelters, and that was something that was. We had just kind of, we're used to staffing just regular mass care shelters, and it's a different mix. But we've come up with a medical needs shelter team, and I'm not going to say the exact numbers because I know I'll get them wrong, but we basically have nurses, a social worker, clerical or administrative support staff, logistics or taking care of the team kind of staff, an environmentalist, and I know I'm forgetting somebody. That's pretty much the team, I think. So we came up with a set number of teams that would really be helpful, and we've trained, I think the last number maybe is 49 teams within public health around the state that we've trained. They know who are on their teams, and you mentioned the reserve staff because that's been a discussion that we've been having lately, is you can actually put everybody on a team, but then you don't have that reserve, and you don't have the flexibility to, when you're presented with something you hadn't fully scoped out with, knowing how to respond. So we've developed that. We also have an administrative or assessment team, which has people that are typically not one of the disciplines you'd have in the medical needs shelter, but have a wealth of public health experience, and those folks we learned that from Katrina, they can go out. There were shelters that were springing up on every corner. Every little church, every little community group was wanting to do right. They were wanting to help, and yet the whole system was getting overwhelmed because we didn't know who was where and how many, and we'd get these calls that this bus load was coming in and going to this church, and then that didn't happen, but they showed up somewhere else, and I know that all sounds so familiar. But what we did was send these, like, I think it was 2 or 4 people teams that would go out and would do whatever the local administrator said was helpful, and they ended up going from shelter to shelter of these ad hoc shelters and just seeing what was needed, making sure nobody was going to get food poisoning from eating there, making sure they had the tie into the local pharmacy. So we've got kind of those 2 main teams, and then of course our environmentalists always go out. They've got a really good system to go out after the storm, and as power starts coming on, inspecting all the restaurants and helping folks to get back up and running and doing environmental assessments and that kind of thing. In terms of the training, for the medical needs shelter teams, our folks did a really good job of pulling together a curriculum and a packet of information that we are very happy to share with anybody that wants it. We've got a number of items in the training. It just goes from like how can you prepare yourself personally and take care of your own family planning needs, that and with your own pets in your house and all of that kind of thing. And then how can you take that, and then knowing what a medical needs shelter is, looking at the cots that you have to set up, seeing what they look like, looking at the kits, what's in the kit, and then if we can. Andy's got a copy of the manual over there. If y'all can pan over there to Andy, he can hold this up for you. It's a, you may not be able to see it yet, it's a medical needs shelter manual, and it goes through the medical protocols and all of the information that you need, coming from doing in a site selection, checking out the site, and that manual we're happy to share that as well, because I think it has some real details. If you're looking at trying to set this up, we borrowed from other people, and we're certainly happy to share what we've got.
That was my
there.
question. Is that a structure that's similar in Louisiana? Is
Exactly.
it exactly? Is it
Exactly. I mean, it was like you're talking about Louisiana. It's the exact
But that
same
was
thing.
already in place.
That was already in place. That had been in place at least since Hurricane George.
Okay.
And normally we have 9 medical needs shelters that open all over the state in major cities. Actually, you might be surprised to know that we had one at the Superdome. And we had our secretary of our department, Dr. Fred Cerise, was in the Superdome when it flooded, taking care of patients. So I think they said they had about 5,000 patients in the Superdome. We have a large one in Baton Rouge, a large one in Alexandria, and different cities. So we've been doing this for a long time.
Let me mention something
Yes.
else too that occurred to me. One thing that we heard from our staff loud and clear is that, and I think you mentioned something about this earlier, these staff work so hard every day in public health departments around the state, but they're not running a medical needs shelter when they're
Right.
doing that. And one of the things we heard from our nurses in particular was that they really felt the need to have a pediatric and adult health assessment refresher course.
Right.
And so that's something we're really working on right now to try to get that set up for them, so that their comfort level with their skills is updated, and that they feel comfortable being able to do the kinds of things you need to do in the medical needs shelter. And of course, we also have had training on incident command and training on just kind of disaster 101 for all our staff. And you have to do that continually. You have staff turnover, people forget when it's not the hurricane
Right.
season, so those kinds of trainings are really critical.
And that was my next question. You both talked about the reserves and having to expand this thing potentially to every single person. How do you do training for the people that you are less likely to be involved, the reserves or the equivalent over here? How do you train them on the front end? Is this what you're talking about?
Well, we trained everybody. That I think there were around 3,000 folks that we trained around on medical needs shelter. Even if they weren't on one of the 49 teams, they might be in the reserve and be called up.
Okay.
And they needed to know what their coworkers were doing.
Right.
They needed to have some way to relate to what their coworkers were doing if their team had been deployed. And then, of course, with all of us, I think, are getting ready or doing the kinds of incident command and NIMS training that the feds are requiring from every state. Let me mention one other thing about that in terms of teams that are deployed, because I think this may get back to part of what the Arkansas person was asking. One thing that's interesting in Region 4, which is the 8 southeastern states that are next to Louisiana, coming this way, Georgia, the Carolinas, Florida, and Mississippi, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and us. We are working with the health department staff and the preparedness staff in those health departments to come up with a regional response, because we all call each other and offer to help. I talked this morning with the office of my counterpart in Florida and in South Carolina, just saying it looks like we may have dodged a bullet. It may be coming your way. Just remember we're here, kind of thing. But we're looking at coming up with typing some teams so that so that if we have an event that hits, say, Alabama, we can request a medical needs shelter team from Florida or North Carolina. We'll kind of know what's that team's made up of, and so we're really doing some regional planning and regional response capability that is a lot more formalized than just the informal networks you used to have before.
Right. And Louisiana's doing exactly the same thing, just with a different set of states.
That's right.
One thing that comes to mind, you both were saying, we have these plans in place, and depending on the hurricane, George, Katrina, Ivan, Dennis, it required us, it forced us to tweak the plans a little bit. What's happened, and I may pose this obviously to you, what's changed now, and we're going to get into a lot of details, but from what we've been talking about, what's changed in your plan now since Katrina? Because as you said, you had a plan in place. It wasn't that you were unprepared, but Katrina was overwhelming. Well, can you just give some specifics of what has changed, either in team structure or training or anything like that?
One thing that we've done with our team structure is we've involved a lot more people on the teams. Whereas before we may have had just medical staff that were pre-scheduled, knew they were going, what shift, etc. Now we have our support staff, numbers and numbers of support staff, administrative staff to provide non-medical support activities in the shelter. And when I say non-medical support activities, that does include assisting with patient care, which is something that we never thought we would be involved in. But it happened during Katrina, and now it's part of the plan.
So part of it.
Part of the plan is we'll have accountants and attorneys and human resources people out there feeding patients, helping patients with their hygiene, etc., which is not something that we were all expecting. And actually, people were thrown into those roles and really weren't trained per se.
Sure.
But now there's more of an effort to get them trained to do some things, and it's kind of a touchy subject.
Well, I mean, if you sign up as an accountant or a lawyer or administrative assistant, you're not necessarily.
You're not expecting it.
Is that similar with Alabama, or are we not? Didn't?
Well, no. I mean, I was naming the people that are on the medical needs shelter team, and we do have like clerical support persons, and we do have an administrative person who might be in our personnel series a health services administrator, or might be an environmentalist or somebody like that. But when they're at the shelter, and that's part of the training that we've done, when they're at the shelter, the expectation for them is that they will do whatever is needed by the nurse who's in charge.
So there's cross training. I mean, if you're on the team, regardless of your specialty,
I mean, you're trained to do your piece, but you're also trained to be able to respond to whatever comes up, because we just don't know.
I think we have another either phone call or email.
It's a phone call from Georgia.
All right. Hello, Georgia. Go ahead.
This is similar to the question that was just asked or related to that topic. Our public health nurses have typically manned congregate shelters and to some degree some medical needs shelters, but have found that we often don't have those acute care skills that some of these patients might have. Who have you had staffing these shelters? And the second question would be, are these shelters co-located with congregate shelters, the medical needs shelters we're speaking of?
I can answer a couple of those things, and then I may turn to our nursing director if he wants to add something. But we have got our clinic and home health nurses that are part of this, and part of what has come up with some of those staff has been their request to have their skills refreshed in terms of doing health assessments and doing some other activities. One other piece that I failed to mention is we also have arranged to have an emergency medical services team, like an ambulance with their crew there at the medical needs shelter, so that they have somebody who's experienced in life-saving skills to be there as their backup, and we also have them on call back to the central office. But we are using our regular nurses, and that has been very upsetting to some of them who've been out of that field for quite some time. So that's why you have to provide that kind of training. And I forgot what the second part of her question was.
The congregate sheltering.
we have very few that are co-located. I think just, you know, one or two maybe, but most of them are standalone shelters, and they're in sites that we have made site visits to with the local staff, with EMA, so that we can see where the cots will go, where the generator goes, you know, how all that is to be set up. Our governor recently, in the last few months, has decided that the state junior colleges are going to be an excellent place for some of the shelters to be, and it may be that at some point in the future we have some that are co-located at those sites, but that's not largely the case right now.
It's the same situation.
Okay.
Our shelters aren't co-located with general shelters. As far as the training and the nurses, we face the same situation, but it was when we first came up with the policy after George, and we have nursing home surveyors. Most of our nurses are like nursing home surveyors. We have public health nurses that don't necessarily do clinical work, and so there was training in place, you know, for a while, where they could get the clinical skills they needed to work in the shelter, but we didn't have enough people.
And was it mandatory training or?
It was mandatory
Right.
training for the teams, but our teams weren't big enough. Our teams got overwhelmed, and that's when we started having to send in staff that may have not been trained to that extent.
How do you, and this is going to be a little bit out of order, but how do you handle, you have someone who signed up for a job, and now the policy has changed, and you had mentioned that, you know, some of the nurses, some of the folks were not that happy with now being asked to do this. I guess two questions, you know, to what extent does it affect turnover, and how do you handle it to get people on board so that there aren't those sort of hard feelings about, wait a minute, that's not what I signed up to do?
Well, I think we have to have ongoing training and interaction with them, and our area administrators and leaders have done a wonderful job, as well as our professional support folks here, at just continuing to work with staff during the trainings, making it clear that, you know, our lives are different than they used to be 10 years ago, and we really do have this responsibility, and this is why it's important. And I think the biggest thing, other than just leadership and attitude with staff to help coach them through it, and recognizing that it can be scary. I mean, I absolutely understand that. Has been the training, and if the more people can understand, see where it is they might be going, understand, you know, what it is they're going to be expecting, know that they're going to have backup, they're not going to be just turned loose, then that really does a lot to help change. And then, you know, as we said, as you get new staff, making it clear from the beginning that that's a part of public health now.
How do you squeeze in all the extra training? You know, because you know, you can imagine, well, wait, that's great, we're doing all this. Well, it's like any other sort of thing. How do you squeeze in an extra class, without people sort of feeling like, wait a minute, I got my job, and now you're continually training me on all these things that I may not be involved in?
Actually, that's how they feel. You know, they're quite overwhelmed right now. I think one of the good things that has happened that you mentioned is the FEMA training, because it gives people a sense of what the structure is in an emergency. And I know that I myself was not really tuned into the fact of the entire plan. I knew about the medical needs shelters, I knew about the teams and that part, but I didn't have a picture of the overall plan for the state. And since I've gone to some after-action meetings and lessons learned meetings, I did come to realize that some of the things that look kind of chaotic to me were actually part of a plan.
Right.
And I think that the FEMA training has, all our staff, we have 12,000 employees, they all have to take it. And I believe that it is giving people more of an idea of where all this is coming from and what the structure is, and like you said, that they're not just out there in their little isolated area, that it's all part of a whole plan. And so I think that's been good.
And with 12,000 employees, it's very easy
it's
to not be able to see
amazing.
the entire picture. I think we got another phone call.
We do, from Georgia.
All right, another phone call from Georgia. Go ahead.
Hi. What kind of relationship do you have with American Red Cross with regard to the medical needs shelters? Do they assist with the staffing or the feeding, that kind of thing?
I'll take a stab at this. We have a wonderful relationship with Red Cross. It has typically, and it still remains, been related to mass care shelters. They are not interested as a corporate policy in being involved with medical needs shelters. However, I will say that there have been a couple of local Red Cross entities that have shown a leadership role at wanting to be part of that in their local community, not in spite of, but kind of in addition to what the regular Red Cross responsibilities are. And some of those folks have been quite helpful, but in general, they want to limit their activities to the mass care shelters and not to be particularly involved with the medical needs shelter. What we have found is that there are some other groups, like I say, there are some individual local Red Cross chapters that are willing to be involved, but in Alabama, the Department of Human Resources is responsible for coordinating like the food and the just general maintenance of the facility, not public health, even in the medical needs shelters. And they have worked with local groups to get people that'll do the feeding. Salvation Army has been wonderful in most places to really help because they don't have the same corporate agency policy restrictions that Red Cross does. So we've been very grateful to Salvation Army in a number of locations, but typically our involvement is a lot more tangential with Red Cross around medical needs shelters.
Same again?
Generally speaking, the only thing that happened that was was very good, Red Cross did get involved with our special needs shelter at LSU because it just got so big. And so they helped a lot with the feeding, not just of the patients, but the staff.
Yeah.
And also, we had a lot of people, although LSU was not a general population shelter, we had a lot of people showing up at LSU, like in the middle of the night, because they saw the signs that where to go, and they figured there would be somebody there, and so they kind of informally opened a shelter at LSU, and so we had a lot of help from the Red Cross at that shelter. But traditionally, like you said, they're more involved with the general population.
I think it is very important, though, to work so closely with Red Cross because there needs to be good coordination because once, when you're not in the immediate danger of the storm itself, you can do a lot at trying to get people who showed up at a medical needs shelter and maybe could be better taken care of at a mass care shelter and save those beds for somebody who truly needs the medical. So you want to have a good working relationship locally with them and statewide with them so that you can help route patients to or individuals to the right resource, the right place.
I want to, I was thinking about the job description and pulling in people who wouldn't necessarily have signed up for that. How does that get impacted when you start talking about things like evacuation? Because now, how do you set the priorities for a person in the job description about what do you do in the case of evacuation and how are the staff priorities set? And I mean, we can go either way.
I'll just say that Dr. Williamson, our state health officer, has made it very clear that he's never going to knowingly send someone into harm's way. And so we're not going to be opening a shelter in an evacuation zone, and we're not going to be, sending staff in when it's too dangerous to travel. And we rely a lot on being up at the Emergency Operations Center for the state with the troopers and all telling us when it's safe or when it's not safe to be moving folks, and trying to work with our emergency management folks and knowing what that timeline is, when they're going to reverse lane, when it's going to be safe to send folks in and out. So I guess that's the...
Well, I guess, it probably wasn't a great way of phrasing it. What I was thinking is, how pre-landfall of whether it was Katrina, Ivan, what have you, how are the priorities set for your staff in terms of if there's an evacuation, what is written for them? What are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to evacuate with everybody? Are there certain people that I guess that's what I meant, particularly as you're expanding the role of individuals in this disaster response. And again, it's to either of you.
In our policy, if you're in a parish that has a mandatory evacuation, you evacuate. if you are a reserve employee, if you're an active employee, the policy says you call your supervisor
Okay, that's
to
sort of
get
what I was-
instructions from there. We're the same. We don't want to put people in harm's
course
way. We do have, traditionally in New Orleans, it was a problem because we knew that everybody was not going to leave the city. I don't care, you know, you could have a mandatory evacuation all day long and you're going to have some people that aren't going to leave, and so they had always known that they had to have a shelter of last resort in New Orleans, and because of the fact that we do have a lot of you know, medically needy people in New Orleans, we had to have a medical needs shelter there, and we did get caught in the Superdome. Otherwise, staff is told if you evacuate, you let us know where you are, because what we do is find out where everybody is and put them to work somewhere else. Like if they evacuate up to Monroe or Shreveport, we'll have shelters up there, they can work there.
Boy, I got a million questions off of that one. How does that work? How do you stay in communication with them, and then logistically, how do you know where to put people if they're not going to be working here, if they're in Shreveport? Or I mean, how did that work?
It worked until just about a year ago, because even though we may have known where most staff was going to be, you know, because most people are good about letting us know, you know, where they're going to. We ended up with so many people out of state that couldn't get back, and we had staff everywhere. We had all over the state. We had, like I said, the majority of them ended up out of state. So we did have a big effort right after the storm to try to figure out where everybody was. And we put up, we had a hotline that had been put up, and that helped tremendously because people were calling, we were getting their location, and we developed a database of where everybody was so we could run reports and find out. And when we had to get staff to a certain area, we could go to that list, and if they were in Louisiana, in that area, we could call them and get them over there. So that worked well. And it was amazing to me that we had so many people that had lost everything that were there, ready and willing to go work in a shelter or man phones or whatever.
How do you, Kat, was there something, did you want to jump in on that?
No, I was saying, you know, we didn't have to deal with that much. Usually our displacement has been limited to just a couple of counties along the coast, and so they know kind of what the plan is in terms of calling in and letting people know where they're going and that kind of thing, but not the massive kind of relocation and, like you say, in other states that you all have. It sounds like you really came up with something pretty quick that was pretty functional. So
yeah, it helped a lot. This year we're not going to have shelters in New Orleans or Lake Charles because Lake Charles got hit hard by Rita, and the staff in those areas are already pre-scheduled to go to other areas, so we've got that ready to go help in other areas. And
it was obviously trial by fire a little bit a year ago. Help me understand though, you had a plan in place, then Katrina happened, and people were sort of all over the place, and this is what you were saying, you sort of had a list of, and people just on their own called in, and you were able to find as many folks as you possibly could.
As many as we could.
And then help me. And so is that essentially what's going to hold, or what's changed, or is the plan now?
Well, we are going to do that again. We already have our hotline up. If you called it now, you just get a message that if there is an emergency, this is the number you would call. But I envision that if we do have a large evacuation, first of all, we do want to know where people are going before they leave, if at all possible. And we've always had a good response to that of knowing where staff is, so that the management staff, if they need to contact someone or send them to another location, they could do that. But it never just happened on that massive scale, and the fact that we lost all that staff overnight, we had over 3,000 employees. That was like a quarter of our workforce was displaced overnight. and at the same time had tremendous demands on us to not only respond to the disaster, but we were under a lot of pressure to keep our normal operations going. And I think that was one of the hardest things we had to deal with, because we had people who were working in a shelter all night and then going into the office the next day. And that went on too long. We were really pressed to do a lot of things with the people that we had.
I mean, yeah, that's
It was
pushing
very difficult.
even with the best intentions, that's pushing people.
It was very
to their
difficult
limits.
because, you know, people think Katrina, well, it affected New Orleans, but it actually affected the whole state, because we had people that evacuated all over the state. Every shelter was full. And we were like y'all, we were also providing services to the general population shelters, because some of the people in the general population shelters probably should have been in a special needs shelter, but there wasn't enough room for all that population. So and people kind of deteriorated after the storm, because where somebody might have been stable before, they might have gone days without their medication and things like that. So we saw a lot of those kinds of situations. But you know, if you're a citizen in North Louisiana and you have a clinic visit at a mental health center, you need to go. So the people who are working in the mental health center that may also be working in the special needs shelter were under the gun to keep providing the normal services as much as possible. Everything didn't just shut down.
So business as usual as
Right,
possible,
as
much
possible.
plus disaster response.
I think
That's
that's
what
something
happened.
that you have to, you know, we really are impressed. Of course, you know, we didn't have nearly the scale of that, but, you know, we do a lot in the South. We do a lot of family planning clinics, you know, in our county health departments, and you want folks to be able to come in and keep
Sure.
that family planning appointment or get whatever immunization they need and that kind of thing. And so trying to figure out that balance between maybe is it better to bring in some more relief staff to help with the medical needs shelter, even though the local staff says, well, we could do it.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it might be better to bring in a team from somewhere else in the state to staff the ongoing shelters, or as we had here, like you did, the longer term shelters that we'd never had to deal with before, and then let the local staff go back to doing their regular clinic services in the county health departments, so that folks that needed regular, just ongoing services could do that. So we learned to be pretty flexible in terms of how we tried to respond to some of those staffing challenges, and I think that's an area that we still have a lot of work to do to figure out that right balance. But you know, it's important for a lot of reasons. You've been looking at all the news coverage in the last week or so about Katrina. Folks need to get some normalcy back in their life, even if it is a weird normal. You know, the buildings around you may be blown down, but if you can know that you can go and get your kids their shots for
Right.
school or whatever,
Go to
it
the
helps
doctor's
you
visit.
feel like you're really kind of getting your life back together. And I think we have that responsibility, as well as just the kind of disaster-related stuff of the shelters and those kinds of responses.
Let's do this, because I mean, we're really getting into right now this whole idea of how do you keep people's energy, morale, and psychological stability up, both as victims and as first responders. Let's do this. We're going to take a short break, just 3 minutes. This is a great time for you to send in emails or call the number. We'll be back in just a little bit, and then we're going to pick up right there and talk about how do we handle and reserve people's psychological and emotional capacity so we can avoid things like burnout. Be right back. Welcome back. We were talking about burnout and sort of the stress of both being a victim, obviously, but we were talking about being a responder, and when you don't have enough people and you are overwhelmed, how do you gauge that so you don't push people too far? And that's, again, thrown out to either or both of you.
Well, I know in Katrina we did push people too far, and fortunately we've been able to get a grant for some mental health services for our employees, which was needed because of the burnout, because of the stress. That has helped. That has helped people keep working for us. We, you know, as sensitive as we tried to be to people's needs, and we were very, very cognizant of the fact that an awful lot of our staff were victims and had lost a lot of people everything they had. We still had to recover as a department. We had to do our job, and whenever we talked to our staff about that aspect of it, that just as individuals had to try to recover, so did our department, so that we could continue to provide the services that were needed more than ever for the state. Most people responded very positively to that message and understood that. Fortunately, our department is in the helping industry. So we have a lot of people who are in those professions that are dedicated to helping others. And I think that helped sort of the culture of the department lent itself to what we were doing.
Except, as you know, with the helpers, that can also be the problem. You know, how do you tell people
we
you need to
did
stop?
have
you need
to
to
do
take
that.
a break?
I mean, some people just kind of had to be let out, you know, and I saw that happen with my bosses, where they really needed to be able to step back and get away from the stress. But, you know, when you're in that kind of situation, there is no relief a lot of times. And one of the things that we've done in looking forward is been more cognizant, and one of the reasons we've involved more people is so people can have breaks.
Right.
Our shifts during disaster response are 12-hour shifts. And we had people who were working 12-hour shifts every day. We had some people working 24/7 for weeks with no real rest. I mean, they might have slept on a cot for a few hours, but didn't get to go home, and really pushed it beyond where it should have been. But in the situation, sometimes there was nowhere else to turn. Now, we'll say what did save us, we could not have done it without volunteers. We had over 3,000 volunteers from all over the country, medical professionals, come to help. And they stayed for various lengths of time, and that, especially when Hurricane Rita came, that's
Right.
how we got through Rita, was with the volunteers.
Listen, we got an incoming call.
Okay.
What
Yes,
we got?
Josh, we've got a phone call from Connecticut.
Wonderful. Hello, Connecticut. Go ahead with your question.
Great, thank you. I'm just concerned about how do you make sure that the workers in this situation keep track with their families to make sure their needs are being met so that that's not creating additional stress on them while they're working in the shelters or whatever else that they're required to do.
I'll say a few things, and then I'm sure you've got some. Part of it has to do with what kind of communication is available. You know, if all the cell phone towers are down, then that's not, you know, a real resource. But one thing that we have done is to make sure that our folks have cell phones, and then we've gotten some more satellite phones so that you can try to stay in contact or get messages to the right people, and also putting laptops deployed out with our folks that have air cards, so that once the communication system does get back up, people can, you know, have a time to get in touch with folks and stay in touch with their families. Before you go on, let me just mention a couple of other things in terms of the stress and rotating folks and making sure they take a break. One of the reasons I think that it's been so important with us in Region 4 to look at trying to see if we can do a better job and coming up with resources that can be shared among our states that have so much in common. You've heard us say several times, you could be describing my state with what you're mentioning there. And that is to be able to have some backup at all levels, including senior staff, so that they have, they know their counterpart in another state, and if they need some help, or even just to bounce some ideas off of somebody, that that person ahead of time, and you have that ability to provide that kind of backup. Because part of what happens is when you're impacted, particularly by a disaster as big as Katrina, you're tired, you're responding to all of those things. You don't know what you need sometimes. And so it's going to be helpful, I think, to have a peer group that can volunteer and say, look, we can help you get this request for this kind of assistance or this kind of staff from other parts of the state. They're going to know public health. They're going to know, what you're really dealing with, and can help handle all of that without you having to get bogged down when you're already worn out in trying to get the logistics of getting a resource here from a sister state. So I think that's going to be a real plus for all of us who are working to try to get some resources for our folks. And it is very important. We've made a big effort this year to get at least 3 people deep in all of our incident command structure, so that it's not just one person doing the whole thing and feeling like if they're not there, it's not going to get done. It's just important to do that kind of thing.
We got another one?
Actually, we have an email from Alabama, and this is for Nancy. It says, describe the role that Louisiana State Mental Health played in the emergency response, i.e. Hurricane Katrina, prior to, during, and after the event.
Okay, mental health before the event they were pre-positioned to be in the medical needs shelters, because we do get mental health patients in there. They were positioned to I think they call them strike teams or something like that, to work with the general population shelters, where if necessary they could be called to go deal with the situation in that area. Like after the storm, their role was pretty much the same, because our shelters were open so long. They were providing mental health services in the shelters. Their role, I think, has expanded in that we've gotten grants, I think, from SAMHSA to provide disaster response, emergency mental health services to people who ordinarily wouldn't be consumers of mental health services because of stress and the effects of being a victim of a disaster to that extent. And also they have helped with our staff.
That's what I was going to ask my question.
Yeah, they have helped with our staff. I have called them when I have talked to people, and because people might call about their insurance or their retirement or their paycheck, because I'm a human resources person. And I've picked up on, in some cases, some problems. I had a lady tell me she was going to commit suicide in the conversation. And so I have called them, and they've been very good at responding to those kinds of things. They'll go talk to our staff people.
Is it an explicit role, though? I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is, you have them, they're there, they can help the responders, but is it, the whole job description thing, is it an integral part of what they do is to assist both the community, but then also to help shore up the resources of the responders? Or is that something that's just sort of, it's there, but it's up to the mental health responder to make the determination?
It was there, but now it's more explicit. It's more of a part of the plan. One thing that we learned, and the people in public health will tell you this over and over, you have to take care of the responders. And so I think we have a more proactive plan to do that. Jennifer Bass and I, she's here with me today, we are assigned to the DHH Emergency Operations Center, and if there's an evacuation. And so now they're going to have massage therapy and different things in there as it goes on. If people really get stressed out, they'll have a way to get relief. And that's just an example of the kinds of things that people are thinking about now. And our mental health staff is thinking about how we can de-stress, help people to de-stress, which wasn't there before.
We got another call.
Yes, we actually have a phone call from Tulane University.
Oh, wonderful. Go ahead, Tulane.
Hi, this is a call for Nancy, primarily, with Louisiana. And my question is, could you elaborate on some of the communication problems you may have had for Hurricane Katrina? And if so, how did you address those issues?
That was one of the main problems, was communication. We lost contact with New Orleans sometime during the night before the storm made landfall. When I say we lost contact with our people in there. We lost contact with our Region 9, which is the region north of Lake Pontchartrain. We lost contact, we didn't have any contact with them after Monday morning. And when I say we lost contact, it was like a black hole. There was nothing coming out. And actually, we had more news out of New Orleans right after the storm than we did the North Shore. The North Shore, it was days and days and days. We had no idea what had happened there. Nobody could call us. We couldn't call them. We had staff that had evacuated to other areas calling us, asking us if have you heard from so-and-so? Have you heard? You know, everybody's trying to get in touch with everyone. And in Baton Rouge, we had a lot of problems with telephones. If you called a landline, you get all circuits are busy over and over. You'd have to call 15 times to try to get through. Cell phones were almost useless because of all the traffic, I guess, and towers being down and all that. So I would say that was probably one of the number one problems we had. As electricity came up, emails worked great. And one thing that we found out and learned was we need to find out what everybody's personal email account is, not just their work account, because you couldn't always get them over the system. So the way like I said, we put up, there were hotlines. The state put up hotlines. We put up a hotline for people to call to let us know where they were. And then as we built that database, we emailed it out to everybody that we knew so that they could look on there and find out where their people were. So it was almost like a grassroots effort, you know, in the first week or so of just trying to find out who was where. And, you know, getting some of the alarming numbers that were coming out about casualties, it was very scary. But it was, and, you know, we'd hear, oh, we heard from so-and-so, and everybody would have a little celebration. So it was a very different kind of situation to be in, and it kind of gave me a little glimpse of what people experience in a war.
Sure.
But just a little glimpse.
Do you send, I know we showed this field operations type, or the training manual. I just was thinking, you know, in the event of a disaster, you're gathering your personal belongings, etc. But if you're a public health worker, is there a field guide or something that somebody can take so that they know what is the basic protocol? Who do I get in touch with? What are the numbers? Where are the emails? I mean, is there anything that's sort of shrunk down that you put on your pocket in the event of emergency? And again, I'm thinking particularly for the sort of non-first team folks, the reserve folks who aren't necessarily thinking about this, you know, every day. How do they know once they've gone away what they're supposed to do or how they're supposed to get back? Is that a part of the training or what?
Well, I don't know that we have anything formally for all the staff, but I know that people know that they're supposed to let their supervisor know, you know, where they are and how they've been deployed. So John, did you have something in addition
Well,
to
we-
that?
we
Let me
actually-
just refer back to John,
Sure.
our nursing director.
As we send the teams out, one of the things that we do is a briefing as we're sending them out. In advance, they're given, this is everything you would need in your suitcase to take with you, so that they come prepared, even with their clothes separated for 7 days in plastic bags. They're giving a list of phone numbers before they leave. We've learned you give them not just a MapQuest or Expedia map, but you also give them written directions, you give them phone numbers of the people to call. They're given their Southern Link phone. All of that's handed to them as they go out with a packet. The center follows them until they get to their site, and then once they get to their site, they work for the leadership in that area until they're released to come back home. So they actually do get those things to take with them, as well as having the manual in the shelter, as well as we're working on another manual now that would have even more extensive information in it.
So basically, as long as you don't find yourself completely cut off from, you know, I was thinking in the case of New Orleans that there were some people who evacuated, ended up someplace you couldn't get, but short of that, there's everything in place for when you're deployed.
I think so, but I think you raise a good point that we probably need to take a harder look at, and that has to do with the staff that aren't on one of the teams that's being deployed, but that are in an impacted area, particularly when the impact is a lot more widespread. You know, the folks in Baldwin County and in Mobile, which is the Alabama Gulf Coast, they know what to do. You know, they know who to let know and to let people know where. They know where they're supposed to report to an alternate work site. You know, and obviously you just keep training on that and keep drilling on that. But you know, if it goes a lot farther than that, on up into southwest Alabama or southeast Alabama, like you were saying, north of the North Shore and along in there, then you know, I think we probably could do a better job in looking at putting some practical things about, you know, for the intake clerk at the county health department.
That's kind
if
of
this
what-
happens
yes.
to you, this is what you need to know, so that they, you know, that it's in the back of their mind all the time that they know what to do. And we do talk about, be sure your supervisor knows where you are and where you're going to be if you're going to your Aunt Josie's house, you know, where that is and what that phone number is. But I think we probably could do a better job of putting together just a how-to little list for those kind of just regular line staff in the county health departments, particularly in those counties that aren't always immediately impacted.
Right, absolutely.
One of the things that we had that did help us a lot was for years, ever since we had the policy, since at least 1998, we've had what we call our recall roster. And we had a system where we have each section has all the names and phone numbers and cell numbers and now personal email accounts of all the employees in that section. And the calling, we had practiced our roster a few times. It starts with this, Dr. Jimmy Guidry, the medical director, calling the secretary of the department and saying, okay, we're activating our emergency system. Then he calls, and then everybody calls, and it's like a big calling tree. And people were told to, you know, everybody was given a copy, so they had everybody's number just in their section, but it would be, you know, a number of people, and to keep it with them at all times, you know, just in case we had to activate and they had to call. So a lot of people were able to pull that out. And if they couldn't get one person, maybe they could get another person.
Is that a common
Yeah, I was going to
standard
say
practice?
that we're right now in the process of updating our alert system, and it is called Alert, and it stands for Alabama something, you know, emergency response team. But we're in the process of redoing that right now, and we've in fact got a drill scheduled for later this week to do a call down exercise on that. So I think part of what's happened with as much automation as we had is that it's really helped make that easier to manage, because you can go in and update your own profile and put all those different contact numbers and different ways of being found, if you will. So that, I think that's becoming even more critical, and like I say, we're actively this week engaged in making sure again that everybody's information is updated. And I'll tell you something else. You know, we're talking a lot today, and that's the purpose about hurricanes and storms, but you don't ever know what kind of disaster or an event that might happen. We had a a leak in this building. This building's 23 stories tall. There was a leak at the top of it, and it wiped out the power for the building for several days. And we realized that, the same persons that were on our call-down list for a disaster wasn't the same as if it was a building specific with 900 employees in it. So you've got to be able to respond. What if we had some kind of terrorist event here in this building or something? You need to have a call-down list that's related to the place, not just kind of being prepared for a hurricane. So all of those kind of experiences help you realize, I's that you need to dot and T's you need to cross to be able to respond to whatever gets thrown at you.
We heard, or we continue to hear all the communication in Katrina's communication was problem. So how well did that call-down list, recall list work? Because again, you hear communication, but you had that sounds like a very effective plan that you had practiced and rehearsed. Did it work? Were there problems? What happened?
It worked really, really well for Hurricane Lily. But with Katrina, it was spotty because just the disruption of so many people evacuating and being out of state.
Well, the infrastructure was gone, right? I mean,
Right.
there were no phone lines.
Right.
So it really makes it,
Yeah.
brings it home to you why it's important to have a redundant system. And that
What-
may be sending somebody with the satellite phone to a place that people know to go to, and then being able to respond to information back. But when your whole infrastructure, not public health's infrastructure, but the state's infrastructure is wiped out, you need to have another means of trying to reestablish communication.
And the email worked real well. That's why we're into getting everybody's personal account.
Got another phone call?
We have an email
Oh,
from
okay.
Georgia. It's, as the disaster approaches and while it's occurring and immediately afterwards, how do employees balance their obligation to assist their children and families with their obligation to respond as a health department employee? If displaced, their families may need them for weeks. If their home is damaged, they may have weeks of work to prevent further damage and make it safe.
That's the hardest thing. We've lost over 1,000 of our staff since Katrina. We're about 1,000 people shorter today than we were a year ago. And one of the biggest reasons is what the caller is talking about. It's very, very difficult for people to continue to do their jobs when they're facing these personal issues. And we've had many, many retirements, resignations. Unfortunately and heartbreakingly, we've had to remove some people from their jobs because they just weren't coming to work. We've had layoffs. We've been fortunate in DHH. We've only laid off a few people, but there have been, I think, like 3,000 people laid off in Louisiana state government due to the storms. To balance that out, I can just tell you that all you can do is be as cognizant as you can be, and we've pretty much left it up to individual administrators who know their employees, know their situations, to extend leave to people if they feel like they need to do that so that they can go take care of situations. But there's always going to be a time when you have to get back to business and recover as a department. On October 17th, all our employees were directed to come back to work. A lot of them did whatever they could, and they may have been in Texas, they may have been in Georgia, but they may have had no place to stay, but maybe staying with another staff member or sleeping on a floor, but they were able to get back and get back into their job. Some people have never been able to come back. That is the heartbreaking situation for us, for losing so much of our hardworking, trained staff. It's been a difficult thing for all of us to go through, and the only thing you just have to kind of, it's very difficult because you have to balance the human aspect of it with the business aspect of it. Because like I said, as much as we would have liked to give everybody a year off to take care of
Right.
whatever they can take care of, and heck, still give them a paycheck, we couldn't do that. And it's been tough.
You know, we always talk about, you always hear surge capacity, and we think of it as numbers. And to me, it so much sounds like this, you know, to what is the, if you will, psychological, social surge capacity. And it made me think, is this sort of what you were talking about, this idea of a regional response, about having a counterpart public health entity ready to go to help, so that while, yes, you have lots of volunteers who want to do good, they don't know, she knows your job, you know her job. Is this kind of an idea where something like this would come into place? Where
Absolutely.
and
I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about. And, you know, we're trying to fine-tune it and make it be, you know, as resource typed as we can, so
Sure.
that when you ask for something, you know exactly what you're getting and what kind of training they've had. But in the meantime, I know that if we had a major event here in Region 4 somewhere, that we would be much further along in terms of having those resources available to you, so that you would get, you know, and what we have to learn, you know, in public health, we have a bad habit of thinking we can just handle anything and we can take care of everything. And, you know, certainly that's true to a certain extent. But with an event like Katrina or any other one, you know, you're doing more harm than good if you do that and you really aren't prepared to deal with it. So, you know, I think what we're learning is when you can ask for help, or if you don't, when you can at least hear somebody telling you, you know, you probably need to call in these teams from North Carolina, or you need to call in these teams from Tennessee to help you with this, because and that's the best practice,
Yes.
is to do that.
Yes.
The worst practice is to say, oh no, I can take care of it all, I don't need any help. And that's, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what we're hoping to do with these regional response, this regional response capacity, so that in our public health community with our sister states, that we know what's available, and those guys, they want to help. We want to help. You know, if a storm were to go to another state and not to us, we would want to be able to send our folks in to help,
Right.
but in a way that they can be productive and helpful, and that the receiving state knows how to use them, and they can feel confident that it's just like deploying their own staff. So I'm real hopeful about the potential for that.
Was this the idea, though, in Katrina? We thought we could handle it. We thought we were ready. We had something in place. It was far greater than we could ever, you know, imagine. Is that?
I think part of what happened, and the reason it was so overwhelming, was our role changed during the event, because we had always been prepared and geared up to open these medical needs shelters and provide these services at the shelters. And it was really not ever intended to be some kind of huge, massive emergency response of so many people. We had to, in the first week, we set up an 800-bed hospital at LSU. It was the largest field hospital ever set up in the United States. And that was never part of the plan. I mean, part of the plan was you had injured people, you had acutely ill people, you sent them to a hospital. The hospitals couldn't take any more people. They were full. They're still full to this day. And to the point where we know if we have another evacuation, we're going to set up a field hospital in Baton Rouge, because the hospitals in Baton Rouge are full. So, still. So, it was, I think that was the biggest shock to our department, was how our role and our responsibilities changed overnight. And we had to quickly meet that challenge as best we could. And it was kind of surreal knowing that you're doing your job and, you know, it's life or death. And I even felt that way as a human resources director. So it was something that we had never, if we had sat down and we knew ahead of time what the scenario was going to be, I don't think we would have made that leap.
Sure.
I think we thought it was going to happen somehow, somewhere else. Or some other way.
Okay, this is an email from Illinois for Nancy. How did you handle pay issues for displaced staff?
Oh, that was a good question. I am the payroll manager. Actually, we're on a human resource information system that is run by the state administrative office. So that's not internal within us. We feed into that system, and they were wonderful. They had backup everywhere, so we didn't lose our system at all. Actually, that Friday, Katrina hit Monday, and Friday was payday. So that was really, in human resources, our very first priority was to make sure that people got their paychecks. Technology came through. The vast majority of people are on electronic funds transfer.
Thank goodness.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That saved us. We had very, very few people still getting paper checks. The problem was the payroll ran fine, and they called us and told us it had all run and it was going to be okay. But when the money hit the financial institutions, unfortunately, there were numbers of people who had their accounts in credit unions and banks that were not part of a bigger system, like a little neighborhood bank or credit union, and their funds, their institution was not able to accept the funds. So we had to find out who they were, run reports, find out who they were, and our state payroll system, who is totally against paper checks and has been very adamant on people getting on electronic checks, they issued paper checks for those people. So we got stacks of checks for employees, and I don't think we still have any checks, but we had some of them for a long time. But we, as much as we could, we contacted people, told them where their check was. So that really was one of the, once we got past that first payroll, that kind of righted itself. And the only other problem we had people who worked for other agencies other than ours that we had to make sure they got paid because their agency was wiped out, and their headquarters was gone. So that was kind of difficult. So we had quite a job but it was just the technology saved us, and the fact that we had a lot of support from the state payroll saved us.
I've got a question that we had touched on a little bit earlier, but that we're seeing a lot of media coverage on this whole idea of safety for the victims in the medical needs shelter. But then again, I keep coming back to the person who signed up, who finds themselves, they're on the reserve team, they're sent in. How do you handle safety for your first responders as well as for the victims when you're talking about the medical needs shelters?
Well, I think what we've done is arranged as part of the pre-arrangements for each site is to have some plan for security. It may be that locally they want to deploy, one of the sheriff's office folks to be there, but we want to have some kind of security there at the shelter site so that staff do feel safe. There was a lot of drug activity around some of the shelters that was very frightening for some folks, so we wanted to always have a law enforcement presence there. There were places that used National Guard to help with that kind of security. And that's something that what we've tried to work with our local folks to know is please ask for, if for some reason it doesn't work and there's not a security person there from some kind of law enforcement, then let your folks know up the chain of command so that the local emergency management agency can get somebody there, because it's our expectation that there will be someone there who can take care of security needs there in the shelter, because that's a very reasonable expectation for staff that are being deployed, is to want to be safe and to hope to be safe, and we need to provide that environment for them.
Do you feel, is that called a challenge, that this idea that people don't know on the front line, what resources might be available to them, or how to access it. Again, use your example. You know, if the law enforcement is not there, make sure you go up your chain of command. Is it a, you know, sort of a communication issue? And I don't mean the phones are not working, but sort of educating, whether it's at the county level or the city level, what you can expect from public health.
Yeah, I think as far as our own staff or even the local emergency management agency staff, you know, having worked so closely together with them in the past 2 years, you know, we've really learned a lot about what each other can do. And the main thing I think that can help with all of that is to have folks understand what incident command structure is, so that, and to know that you can always ask whoever your on-site supervisor is, and that person knows how to get up with the local people to get through the EMA to get the issue raised. And it sounds like you're going through a bunch of hoops, but you're not. I mean, it's strictly just get it to your local EMA through the right channel, and then they'll get the request up. And then within the department, we have somebody on duty 24/7 that they can call if they get in an emergency or in a tight, and we'll get back with them or get somebody to help them, and they can count on that being the case.
And are people aware of it? I mean, is your sense
We
that
train them. We absolutely cover
yeah.
it in training. Yeah, that's one of the main things, is that, you know, it's in our manual. You go through what the steps are, what to do in different situations. We're always looking at, you know, do we need to add something specific in our training about a particular incident if it happens enough that in this situation, remember to do this. But we really go over and over and over that, and in the deployment instructions too, when they're actually being deployed, remind them about that, so because we don't want them to feel abandoned. You know, I checked with several of our folks around the state who frequently deploy, our administrators where we deploy teams from, and the ones that are in impacted areas. And the one thing that they stress more than anything else is you can't have too much communication with your staff. And even though you've trained and trained and trained, you know, always please tell them, please tell your staff, you know, that you've got a way to contact people if you get scared, or if you have a situation come up that you just can't think how to respond to it. You know, the communication with your staff, keeping them as informed as you can with any kind of information that you get about the situation. The more you communicate, the better off people's comfort level are, and the better, you know, better functioning they're going to be in that situation.
Again, was it a matter of the infrastructure was wiped out, or the, you know, is the system similar to the way that Kathy just described it?
It's similar to the way Kathy described it. Back to the security issue, we've always had National Guard presence at our shelters. We don't open a medical needs shelter without a National Guard group there. I think their role has kind of expanded now. But I think what Kathy touched on is very true. I think a key to it is people knowing the structure of the incident management system. And knowing where to go, and I think the structure works. They know who that person is that they go to with those questions and those needs.
And I think
yeah.
one of the things is even when you, especially when you're getting overwhelmed, you know, you just have to keep reminding folks, no, remember, this is who you go to, you know, and so, because it's so easy to get off track, and you've got to make sure that all the information is getting to the right place, and you have to just remind folks, you don't call your former supervisor from the county where you were deployed from, you go with your nurse person who's in charge of the shelter here, and they'll get the answer for you, and you just have to keep with that, and that's the way you're not going to get at cross purposes.
We're running out of time. 30 seconds, take-home message.
Oh, the take-home message, I think, would be expect the unexpected. You can plan, you can train, but it all comes down to people being in positions who have to make decisions. It's like I've heard someone say, if you are a leader, lead. And that's pretty much what it came down to. Everybody had to look at what was right in front of them and do the best they could, and that's how we got through it, because it, like I said, it totally overwhelmed our system. So I'm in awe of the people that I know what they did. And I wish there was more a way to get the word out sometimes about what people did, because I think most of the country doesn't appreciate what happened at the ground level and what we saw as a response.
That's part of today, a little
Yeah,
bit anyway.
I think, well, you know, I would say, again, I checked with some of our folks because I knew what I kind of thought, but I wanted to see what our folks that are out in the field thought. And I think there are three main messages. One, I just touched on, and that's communicate. The more you communicate, the more you let folks know what's going on, the more you say, you know, I don't have the answer for that right now, but I'll get it for you and I'll get back with you. Just the more you can communicate, the better off you are. It's so important to do an after action. It's so important to do a debriefing, you know, when the time's right, not too soon, not too late, but really go through and to make it be completely in a safe environment so that you can say, you know, what really was horrible and what really went well, and there's not any repercussions. It's not about who to blame, it's about how to make it better next time. And I think that's, you know, that's so important. And that I think, you know, the thank yous. You just can't tell people thank you enough, because you look at what all people did, you know, certainly in your state and in our state and around the country. You know, you just have to let people know how much you appreciate what they did, because none of this would have been successful without the folks that worked, and that includes people that were taking care of the computers in the central office, and it includes the people that were at the shelters, and the environmentalists that were inspecting water systems, and, you know, whoever else it involves. But I think you just can't tell people thank you enough for the job they did, and recognize everybody's contribution.
Well, and I want to thank both of you for giving that information, that angle that you don't always see, and that you don't get out there. And it was a pretty quick 90 minutes. That wraps up for today. You know, I want to thank Nancy and Kathy for being here, and as I said, sharing not just the logistics of this, but their personal stories and their personal experiences. I hope you've enjoyed the program as much as I have. I want to tell you about an upcoming broadcast. On Thursday, September 28th, Jim Craig and Chris Downing will be joining me as they present a broadcast entitled Utilizing Government Resources in a Disaster. And on Friday, October 20th, there will be another broadcast discussing collaboration and conflict resolution for success in public health. Concludes today's broadcast. Thanks for joining us. Have a great afternoon, and I'll see you on the 28th.